He thought land made him a king. He thought money turned cruelty into discipline. When Grant Kincaid slammed the steel shipping container door on the dog that had slept at his wife's feet for 10 straight years, he thought no one in this dusty Texas port town would ever dare challenge him. He didn't see the battered pickup rolling past the edge of his property line. He didn't see the man in the faded navy hoodie behind the wheel, with a scarred Dutch shepherd sitting straight in the passenger seat, watching through intelligent amber eyes. He didn't see the moment his entire world began to shift. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The late April heat in Port Aransas, Texas came early that year. It pressed down from a white-hot sky, baking the asphalt roads and turning the salty air into something thick enough to chew. The sea breeze that usually softened the town's edges felt tired, rolling lazily in from the Gulf, carrying the smell of diesel, fish, and fried shrimp from the harbor. On the edge of town, where pastel beach cottages gave way to sprawling ranch estates owned by people who only pretended to be local, the Kincaid property sat like a fortress. The house itself was a modern glass and steel monument to money, a flat-roofed mansion perched on a rise overlooking the dunes and the glimmering line of the Gulf beyond. A private drive wound up past manicured live oaks and imported palms. Cameras watched every angle. Razor-straight white fencing marked off the land like underlined sentences on a page. This is mine. But today, the mansion did not look like a dream home. Black cars lined the circular driveway. Men in dark suits and women in understated designer dresses stood on the front steps, murmuring warm platitudes that evaporated as quickly as the sweat on their foreheads. The last cluster of mourners drifted toward their SUVs, faces set in masks of sympathetic sorrow. They had come to pay their respects to Martha Kincaid. Inside, the air conditioning was set too low, fighting the Texas heat with an icy persistence that made the marble floors and tall white walls feel more like a gallery than a home. The floral arrangements that crowded the foyer looked out of place, bursts of color in a world of polished stone and glass. Near the wide picture window overlooking the dunes, a dog lay pressed against the cool tile. She was a Dutch shepherd, brindle coat dulled with stress, ears pricked but weary. Her name was Valkyrie, Val for short. 10 years old, joints a little stiff now, eyes a little clouded at the edges, but still very much a working dog in the way she held herself. Alert, poised, waiting always for a command from the one person who had never failed her. That person was gone now. Martha's scent still clung to the navy blue throw blanket in the corner of the room, the one Val had dragged down from the bedroom door 3 nights. Ego, and refused to leave. She lay half atop it as if she could pin time in place, as if the weight of her body could keep Martha from disappearing completely. Every time the front door opened, Valkyrie's head lifted. Every time it closed without bringing Martha back, she let it fall again, eyes tracking the movement of polished shoes, hearing the muttered condolences, the practiced murmurs of such a loss and taken too soon. Now, as the last of the guests filtered out, only 2 human heartbeats remained loud in Val's world. One was the slow, heavy rhythm of Grant Kincaid. The other was the sharp, fast staccato belonging to Tiffany Raines. She didn't even like this place, Tiffany snapped, breaking the fragile quiet as the front door finally shut on the last visitor. She kicked off her black heels, sending them skidding across the tile. All this glass made her nervous. She always said she felt like a bird about to hit a window. I told you we could have done the reception at the country club. Grant stood near the bar, fingers braced on the quartz countertop. He was in his early 50s, tanned by golf course sun rather than hard work, his brown hair going silver at the temples, just enough to look distinguished. He had the build of a man who paid trainers to maintain the illusion of strength and a jaw that had been in more glossy magazine spreads than local newspapers. Oil, land, and logistics. That was the polite way people described his empire. The truth about the pipelines cut through wetlands without permits, about the accidental spills cleaned up by nighttime bulldozers, never made it into the glossy photos. Today, for the first time in a long time, Grant looked tired, not from grief, despite the black suit and the artfully reddened eyes, but from the weight of performance. She wanted it here, he said, voice stiff. So it was here. Tiffany stalked across the room, black dress clinging to curves designed to be noticed. She carried the smell of expensive perfume and stale resentment. She wanted a lot of things, Tiffany said. She wanted you to stop drilling under the marsh, remember? She wanted you to quit flying that girl out to the lake house. And now she's gone, and you are still letting her run this place. She flicked her fingers toward Valkyrie with a sneer, as if the dog were a piece of ugly furniture. Val's ears lowered, but she did not move. She recognized Tiffany's voice, the sharp pitch that always came with the tang of stress hormones and cheap sweetness. Martha had never liked when Tiffany came to the house. The arguments that followed always sent Val creeping to Martha's side, head under her hand in silent support. "I told you," Tiffany continued. "I'm not staying overnight in this house with that thing watching me." The word thing hit the air like a slap. Grant's eyes slid toward the dog. For a moment, something complicated flashed across his face, something like memory. He had been in the truck the day Martha picked Val up from a working dog breeder in Oklahoma, insisting they didn't need some hyperactive army mutt in the house. He remembered the car spinning on black ice 6 months later, the guardrail crumpling, Martha trapped in the passenger seat with a broken leg, Val braced against the windshield, barking until help came. He remembered other things too. The nights Martha had slept in the guest room after another whispered phone call and another lie. The way Val sat facing his door, not hers, when the shouting got loud, eyes flat, body strung like a bow. Grant took a breath that felt like he was inhaling dust. "Martha's gone," Tiffany said, closing the distance between them, voice softening into the tone she used when she wanted something. She laid a hand on his chest, fingers drifting down the front of his shirt. "Her dog is a liability. Look at her. She's old, grumpy, probably going to bite somebody. The last thing you need is some tourist kid getting nipped and their parents suing us. It's time to let go." Val understood few words, but she knew her name, Martha's name, and the word gone. Gone was the word the hospice nurse had used. Gone was what Martha's heartbeat was now. Val lifted her head, eyes locking on Grant. He stared back, jaw working. She was important to Martha. Tiffany's mouth twisted. So was that marsh you had bulldozed. She walked to the window, staring out at the 3 shipping containers near the edge of the property, stacked neatly beside the equipment shed. Grant used them to store tools and spare parts for his small private trucking fleet. Dark red logos on white trailers glowed under the Texas sun beyond them. "You've got a container out back," Tiffany said. "You said the crew's hauling one to the salvage yard tomorrow. Put the dog in there for the night. I have a friend at the shelter. Discreet one, not the county joke. They'll take care of it. Or you can let one of your drivers drop her on the side of the highway. She's just a dog, Grant. Martha's dead. That mutt's the only thing keeping her ghost walking around this house." Val's ears flicked. Martha, ghost, dog. Grant swallowed the last of his drink. The burn of the whiskey made it easier to feed the coil of anger uncurling in his gut. Not at Tiffany, not really, but at the fact that he felt anything at all when he looked at Val. The hospice doctor had used words like sudden arrhythmia and couldn't have known. Martha had been gone before the ambulance arrived. No autopsy, no questions. No time to ask the questions that gnawed at him when he woke sweating at 3 a.m. with the taste of metallic panic on his tongue. He didn't like questions. He liked control. And every time Val stared at him with those unblinking amber eyes, he felt like she knew something. "Fine," Grant said. The word came out sharper than he intended. "Fine. We'll handle it." He slammed the empty glass down hard enough to make Val flinch. "In fact," the thought bloomed in his mind all at once, cold and practical. "It solves another problem." Tiffany frowned. "What problem?" Grant gave her a thin smile. "Those activists that keep sniffing around my trucks," he said. "The ones claiming we're hauling hazardous waste instead of fertilizer. They tried to follow one of the rigs last month. I had to have a talk with their leader. If a concerned citizen sees an old dog and calls animal control while we just happen to be loading a container, it muddies the water. I can spin that." He straightened his jacket. The decision hardened inside him like quick-set concrete. "Go change," he told Tiffany. "We'll go into town, get dinner. By the time we're back, she'll be someone else's problem." Val watched him approach with her muscles tensing beneath her brindled coat. He didn't call her by name. He just snapped his fingers sharply. "Up!" She rose, joints aching, blanket slipping away. Whatever happened next, she would follow. It was what Martha had taught her. Outside, the heat slammed into them like the exhaust from a jet engine. Grant led Val toward the outbuildings, shoes crunching on the gravel, the air thick with dust and the faint chemical tang that clung to the trailers. One of the containers stood with its doors yawning open, dark interior smelling faintly of rubber and rust. Inside, stacks of folded tarps and pallets pushed up against the metal walls. Grant walked to a beat he recognized now, the rhythm of anger disguised as logic. "It's just for a little while," he muttered, more to himself than to the dog. "Tomorrow they pick up the container. Maybe someone opens it, maybe they don't. Either way, problem solved." He turned to Val. "In?" She hesitated. Martha had never asked her to walk into a dark box. Martha had never smelled like this. Cigarette smoke on fabric, stale whiskey, guilt. Val took a step back, nails scraping on the ramp. Something in Grant's face tightened. "I said in." He grabbed the back of her harness and yanked, hard. Pain shot through her shoulders. Val stumbled forward, paws skidding on the steel floor. The air inside the container was hotter, stiller, pressing against her chest. Grant released the harness and stepped back, breathing fast. For a moment, he just looked at her there in the shadows. She looked back, ears half flattened, tail low, but not tucked. There was no way to explain to her that this wasn't his fault, that the lawyers had promised him the EPA wouldn't look too closely if the right donations were made, that the activists who'd filmed his trucks at the marsh had accidentally driven off the causeway, and the fact that he slept fine most nights bothered him less than it should. He didn't have to explain. He just had to close the door. The steel slammed shut with a hollow boom that echoed like thunder inside the container. The sudden darkness swallowed Val whole. The only light came from a thin line at the bottom of the doors, dust motes dancing in that narrow band of gold. The first blow of panic hit like a wave. Her chest tightened. The heat wrapped around her, the smell of old rubber and oil sharp and wrong. She scratched at the door, claws scraping metal, the sound shrill in the enclosed space. Outside, Grant slid the heavy lock into place. He turned, jaw tight, as Val's paws drummed frantically on the steel. He walked away, faster than necessary. Down the private drive, the world went on. Tourists in rental jeeps headed toward the beach. Fishermen backed boat trailers down the launch ramp. Someone's kid threw bread crusts at gulls. And a navy blue pickup truck, old paint faded by years of salt and sun, rolled past the edge of the Kincaid property. Behind the wheel, Ethan Cole drummed his fingers once on the steering wheel before gripping it again. He didn't like driving this road. It brushed too close to memories he'd come to Port Aransas to outrun. Convoys along dusty roads, containers just like those sitting in the desert sun. Always the question of what was really inside them. But the detour saved him 10 minutes getting from the boatyard to the dingy rental he was calling home, while he helped his uncle recover from surgery. So, here he was. Ethan was 34, shoulders thick with the kind of muscle that didn't come from gym mirrors, but from years of carrying gear heavier than sin. His hair was close-cropped, dark, flecked with early gray near his temples. There was a faint scar along his left cheekbone, the white line disappearing into the stubble on his jaw. His eyes, a cool blue-gray, scanned constantly. Even on a sleepy Texas road, he tracked movement, kids on bikes, a minivan rolling a stop sign, a shape near the edge of the Kincaid lot that didn't quite fit. Beside him, in the passenger seat, Nova sat like a statue. She was a Dutch shepherd, her brindled coat darker than Val's, muscles coiled even when she seemed to be at rest. One ear had a V-shaped notch from shrapnel, a faint white streak traced along her muzzle, fur never growing back right after the explosion in Kandahar 2 years earlier. Retired war dog, the paperwork had called her. Ethan thought of her as the partner who had dragged him back from the edge of a crater, while his ears rang and the world moved in slow, burning pieces. He'd left the teams after that. He'd taken Nova with him. Now both of them were trying to learn how to walk in a world where no one shot at them, and the loudest noise at night was the distant thump of a beach bar's music. Nova's head turned sharply toward the Kincaid property as they passed. A faint, hollow metallic thudding drifted over the low hum of the truck's engine, a sound that didn't belong with birdsong and palm fronds. Ethan's hand shot to the radio, turning it down until the only sound was the wind. He lowered his window. The thudding came again. Scrape. Scrape, scrape. Nova whined low in her throat. Not fearful, alert. Ethan slowed the truck without even thinking about it. On the far side of the fence line, near the stacked shipping containers, dust puffed in small bursts from the gap beneath the nearest set of doors. The metal rattled with each impact. To anyone else, it might have sounded like nothing, a loose hinge in the wind. To someone who'd spent too many nights listening to desperate hands pounding on steel from the inside, it sounded like a heartbeat trapped in a box. Ethan's knuckles tightened on the wheel. His chest went hot, then cold. "Easy," he said softly to Nova. "We're just looking." He pulled over onto the sandy shoulder. The heat hit him the second he stepped out of the truck, an oven blast that made his t-shirt stick to his back. He shaded his eyes with one hand, scanning the property. Cameras on the gateposts, a no trespassing sign that assumed people still respected those. The main house farther uphill, reflective glass catching the sun. No one visible in the yard. The containers sat near the back fence, close enough that he could hear the sounds from the road. Scrape, scrape. A short, sharp bark, muffled. Something alive was in there. Something not okay. Ethan glanced once at the house. Nobody coming. He hopped the low ditch and walked up to the fence, Nova heeling at his side. The top of the white vinyl was too high to climb without making a scene, but he didn't need to go over. He just needed to see. Ethan stepped onto one of the support posts, boosting himself enough that he could look over. The container nearest him was closed, heavy lock dangling from the clasp. Dust puffed each time something slammed into the inside of the door. The sound of claws on metal carried clearly now, frantic, scraping, growing weaker between blows. He didn't think. He dropped back down, went straight for the gate intercom. Nova moved with him, ears forward, nose working. Ethan stabbed the call button. "Yeah?" A bored male voice crackled through the speaker. "This is Ethan Cole," he said. "Got a situation on your back lot. Something alive is trapped in one of your containers." Silence. Then a different voice came online, smooth, irritated. "This is Grant Kincaid, and the only situation on my property is a stranger leaning on my gate. Step away from it." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You've got an animal locked in a steel box in 90-plus degree heat. That's not just your property, that's a felony." "Did you miss the sign, Mr. Cole?" Grant asked. "No trespassing. Whatever you think you hear is none of your business." Nova whined again, pushing her head against Ethan's hip. Another thud came from the container, weaker now. A hoarse, desperate bark followed it, then a choking sound that made Ethan's stomach flip. He pictured that kind of heat inside a metal box. The air would be baking, oxygen dropping fast. Every breath would feel like inhaling fire. "Open it," Ethan said. "Now." "Walk away," Grant replied. The smoothness had sharpened to something brittle. "Or I call the sheriff and have you removed." Ethan stared at the intercom. The seconds ticked by and the sweat running down his spine. Another scrape, a softer one. His mind split along a familiar line. Rules on one side, lives on the other. In the desert, that choice had been easy. Save who you could, fill out the paperwork later. Here, the paperwork wore boots and a badge and drank coffee at the gas station. Here, the man behind the voice donated big checks at election time and put his name on hospital wings. Ethan looked at Nova. She looked back, eyes steady, jaw tight. She didn't know money. She knew distress. And whatever was in that box was sounding a lot like something that wasn't going to last another 15 minutes. "Fine," Ethan said. He kept his voice calm. "Call whoever you want." He stepped back to the truck and reached behind the seat. His fingers closed around cold steel. Not a weapon, a bolt cutter. He'd used it last week to help his uncle cut the rusted lock off a boat trailer at the marina. He walked back to the gate. "Last chance," he said quietly into the speaker. "Open it or I do." Grant's laugher crackled, ugly and surprised. "You cut that lock, vet boy, and I'll own you. Your little war stories won't help you in court." Ethan didn't answer. He stepped back just enough for leverage, set the jaws of the bolt cutter around the long arm of the lock on the gate. Not the main motorized mechanism, just the cheap external padlock backing it up. He squeezed. His arms had lowered heavier weights than this. The metal groaned, then snapped. An alarm wailed from somewhere near the house, a high-pitched shriek. Ethan pushed the gate open just enough to slip inside. 911, he said to Nova, the word more to steady his own moral ledger than her. They can meet us out back. He jogged across the gravel, boots kicking up dust, heat radiating off the steel sides of the containers. The closer he got, the worse the smell. Hot metal, rubber, fear. The padlock on the container door was heavier than the one on the gate, but not by much. His hands moved automatically, set, brace, squeeze. The lock groaned, bent, then gave way with a dull crack. He yanked the doors open. The heat that poured out hit him like opening an oven. Nova staggered back, sneezing. Inside, the shadows resolved into a trembling mass of brindled fur. Valkyrie lay sprawled on her side, sides heaving, tongue lolling out. Gums of frightening pale color that screamed shock to anyone used to reading the signs. Her paws were bloodied from where she had clawed at the inside of the door. The air around her shimmered with the heat, smelling of singed fur and panic. She tried to lift her head when the light flooded in, but her neck muscles shook, too weak. Her eyes rolled toward Ethan, glazed but still aware enough to register something new. "Easy, girl," Ethan said, voice dropping into the calm, commanding register he used in the field. He stepped inside, ignoring the oppressive wall of heat that slammed his lungs. "Nova, back." Nova stayed at the threshold, panting hard, eyes locked on the suffering dog. Ethan dropped to one knee beside Val, careful not to crowd her. He pressed 2 fingers gently against the inside of her thigh, where the femoral artery pulsed, counting the frantic, weak beat. Too fast, too thready. "Heat stroke," he muttered. "Maybe worse." He slid his arms carefully under her shoulders and hips, feeling the heat radiate from her like a furnace. The fur on her belly was almost too hot to touch. The moment he lifted her, she let out a strangled groan. Her head lolled limply against his chest, breath rasping in shallow pants that spoke of a body too close to the edge. "I got you," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He backed out of the container, stumbling once as the sudden shift from burning air to merely blistering threw his balance. By the time he reached the truck, sirens were already wailing in the distance. The property alarm had done half his job. He had the door open, and Val laid across the back seat in less than 30 seconds. He cranked the AC to max, aimed the vents toward her, and dumped an entire bottle of lukewarm water over her paws and belly to start bringing her temperature down. Nova paced in the cramped floorboard, whining, licking Val's muzzle as if urging her to stay. The first sheriff's SUV roared through the open gate just as Ethan climbed into the driver's seat. Dust billowed behind it. Deputy Mark Reyes stepped out, hand already resting on the butt of his sidearm out of habit. He was in his 40s, stocky with a sun-creased face that had known Ethan since high school. "Cole?" Reyes blinked in surprise. "What the hell?" The front door of the mansion banged open. Grant Kincaid strode down the steps like he wasn't sure whether he wanted to scream or smile for the cameras that weren't there yet. "That man broke onto my property," Grant shouted, pointing at Ethan. "He cut my gate, broke into my container, and stole my dog." Reyes's head pivoted like it was on a swivel. His gaze landed on the open container, the cut lock, the open gate. Then on the truck, where Val lay half-conscious, chest heaving, Nova hovering. "Your dog?" Ethan snapped. "You locked her in a steel box in this heat. She wouldn't have lasted another half hour." "I put her there for 10 minutes while the crew moved gear," Grant said smoothly. "I was getting water. He's overreacting. You know these vets, Mark, they think everything's war." The words slid through the air, oily and practiced. Reyes's jaw tightened. For a heartbeat? Ethan saw the old version of the man, the one who'd worn the same football jersey Ethan had back in the day, side by side on a field. Then Ethan saw the newer layers, deputy, homeowner, father of 3 kids whose school library bore the Kincaid name. "Look at her," Ethan said, forcing his voice to stay level. "Check her gums, touch her coat. She's on fire. If I hadn't opened that door—" "I told you not to touch my property," Grant cut in. He turned to Reyes, posture shifting into wounded dignity. "Deputy, I want to press charges. Trespass, destruction of property, theft of an animal. That dog is microchipped to my wife and registered to this address." Another siren wailed, closer now. A second cruiser pulled up, tires squealing. Ethan looked at Val. Her breaths were getting shallower. Bile rose in his throat. "She needs a vet, now." Animal control is on the way, the second deputy said. She was younger, face shuddered. They can decide. She'll be dead by then, Ethan snapped. The world narrowed down to a series of choices, each razor thin. Stay, fight, argue, watch the dog die between lines in a report, or move. He made the same decision he'd made in dusty villages half a world away when bureaucracy tried to weigh more than blood. Ethan threw the truck into gear. "Cole," Reyes barked, "don't you dare!" The old pickup lurched forward, tires spitting gravel, doors still open enough for the deputies to jump aside or risk becoming hood ornaments. Ethan swung hard, blowing through the half-open gate, dust swirling in his wake. Sirens screamed to life behind him. Nova braced herself as the truck fishtailed onto the asphalt, claws digging into the seat. Val moaned weakly in the back, chest hitching. "Hold on," Ethan muttered, foot pressing the accelerator. "Not losing you today?" The Coastal Bend Veterinary Center sat across from a strip mall laundromat and a taco joint, the neon paw print sign flickering slightly at the edges. People on the sidewalk turned as the blue pickup screamed into the lot, brakes squealing. Ethan didn't bother parking straight. He killed the engine, threw open the back door, and scooped Val into his arms. The blast of cool air inside the clinic hit him like grace. "Need help!" he shouted, voice echoing off the tile as he barreled through the door. "Heat stroke, possible collapse. She's crashing." A woman in green scrubs behind the counter looked up, eyes widening. Before she could form words, the door to the back swung open. "Bring her here," a crisp voice commanded. Dr. Liza Harper moved toward him with the confidence of someone who had spent too many nights elbow-deep in emergencies. She was in her mid-30s, brown hair twisted into a knot that had mostly given up, freckles spattered across her sharp nose. She'd gone to high school with Ethan too, though their paths had barely crossed back then. Different crowds, different futures. Right now, none of that mattered. Ethan laid Val gently on the stainless steel exam table. Her body looked small up there, despite her size. Liza's hands moved quickly, checking temperature, pulse, gum color. "Hyperthermia, extreme," she said, voice tightening. "Pulse is weak. Get cooling packs, IV fluids, oxygen, move." Techs exploded into motion around them. Liza glanced once at Ethan, her eyes flicking to the sweat on his face, the set of his jaw. "You bring her in like this from your truck?" "Pulled her out of a shipping container," Ethan said, locked on Kincaid's back lot. Something flashed in Liza's eyes. Not surprise, recognition, annoyance. "Of course," she muttered. He decided to handle his problem his way. She slid an IV catheter into Val's leg with practice speed, hooked up fluids, began directing the techs like a field commander. "We're going to cool her slowly," she said. "Fans, cool water on her paws and groin, but no ice baths. I don't want to shock her system. Come on, girl, stay with us." Val's chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid movements. Her eyes were half closed. A new sound reached Ethan's ears, the distant wail of sirens pulling into the lot. Deputy Reyes's SUV, another unit. Maybe animal control. "If they ask," Ethan said quietly, "I'll sign whatever you need me to sign. I broke his lock. I drove her here. Just don't let her go back." Liza didn't look up from the dog. "She goes back there. She dies," she said flatly. "I took an oath, Cole. So did you. Some of us still remember what that means." Her mouth pressed into a hard line. "I'll deal with the law," she added. "You go sit down before you fall down." He suddenly realized his hands were shaking. The adrenaline that had carried him from the container to here drained away, leaving his legs feeling like wet sand. He stepped back from the table, heart thudding in his ears. Nova pressed against his thigh, grounding him. Through the narrow clinic window, he could see the red and blue lights reflecting off the glass. Grant Kincaid was already on the phone with his lawyer. Ethan could practically hear the narrative forming. Rogue vet kidnaps grieving widower's dog, endangers public, blah blah hero complex. The difference this time was that the dog he'd pulled from a box wasn't just a casualty of someone else's war. She was the only witness to one. And as Ethan stood there, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest, he made a quiet promise to a dog who couldn't hear it. Whatever truth she carried, whatever debt she was owed for 10 years of loyalty, he'd collect it, even if it meant going to war all over again, this time in courtrooms instead of deserts, with laws instead of rifles and a dog instead of a platoon at his side. Because some battles, he was starting to realize, never really ended. They just changed shape. Weeks later, when Valkyrie stood unsteadily on Ethan's small, screened-in porch overlooking the inlet, the sunset painting her brindle coat in gold, he would remember every second of those first hours. The way she'd crashed, then rallied. The moment her temperature finally dropped below the lethal line. The way she'd opened her eyes, seen him, and thumped her tail once, slow and deliberate, as if stamping a decision. Him. She'd chosen him. And that choice, simple and wordless, would set off a chain reaction that tore through Port Aransas like a Texas thunderstorm. Grant Kincaid did call the sheriff, and the sheriff did file charges: trespass, destruction of property, unauthorized removal of an animal, but the story refused to stay in the neat frame Grant tried to build around it. A vet tech's younger brother posted a blurry photo of Ethan's blue truck screeching into the clinic lot with a collapsed dog in his arms. It hit social media with the caption, "This dude just broke a billionaire's lock to save a dog from boiling alive in a box. I don't know if it's legal. I do know it's right." A waitress at the harbor bar, who'd lost a cat to one of Kincaid's trucks 4 summers ago, recognized Valkyrie from the picture. "That's Martha's dog," she whispered, showing the photo to her manger. "She used to bring that dog to town. Said she trusted her more than most people." Doc Liza, no fan of gossip but less of a fan of lies, printed out Val's chart. Temperature logging, photos of pad injuries, vet notes that used phrases like prolonged confinement in extreme heat and likely intentional. The local paper, usually starved for anything more exciting than fishing reports and city council zoning disputes, smelled blood in the water. Or maybe it smelled justice. And then there was the neighbor, 2 lots over from the Kincaid estate. A retired school teacher named Dorothy Bell had been testing out her new doorbell camera the day of the funeral. She'd caught 15 seconds of video when her motion sensor tripped. Grant walking toward the container with Val at heel, face twisted, his voice faint but audible. "You should have died with her." The camera hadn't caught what happened inside the container, but it had caught the time, the sun angle, the fact that 22 minutes passed between Val going in and Ethan pulling away in his truck, sirens chasing him. 22 minutes in a steel box in Texas heat. The math was simple. The morality, even more so. Reyes found himself torn in ways his badge training had never quite prepared him for. On paper, Ethan had broken the law. In reality, Ethan had done what any halfway decent person would have done if they'd heard that frantic clawing and had bolt cutters handy. The DA, more cautious, saw something else. A high-profile potential case with cameras already pointed at it. If she backed Kincaid and lost, she'd look like the woman who prosecuted a veteran for saving a dog. If she backed Ethan and lost, she'd look like she'd tried. She decided to let the courts sort it out, which was how, 8 weeks after Martha's funeral, Ethan found himself sitting at a polished oak table in a courtroom in Corpus Christi, opposite Grant Kincaid in a Navy suit, with half the town watching from the gallery. The civil petition Grant's lawyers had filed was simple: return of property. The property in question lay on the cool tile in the corner of the courtroom. Wearing a bright blue harness and a service dog vest, Liza had insisted on purchasing with her own money. Valkyrie's coat shone now. Her eyes were brighter. A faint scar marked the place where the IV had gone in. She lay with her head on Ethan's boot, body angled just enough that she could see both him and the door. If the judge noticed the way her ears flicked back every time Grant shifted in his seat, she made no comment. Judge Miriam Cortez had been on the bench long enough to see every kind of evil filtered through polite language. She was not fond of theatrics. She was fond of facts. Grant's lawyer painted a picture in soft, sympathetic strokes: a grieving widower, a loyal old dog whom he had temporarily secured for her own safety while equipment was moved, a hot-headed veteran who broke locks and kidnapped a pet instead of calling proper authorities. On cue, Grant wiped away a tear when he spoke of Martha. He spoke of how she had rescued Valkyrie from a shelter. The breeder paperwork said otherwise, but the lie had a nicer ring. He spoke of late nights when the dog had slept at the foot of their bed, guarding them both. "And now," he said, voice cracking, My wife's last comfort is being kept from me by a stranger who thinks he knows better than family. In the gallery, a few people sniffled. Others shifted, eyes sliding toward Ethan without quite meeting his gaze. When it was Ethan's turn, he didn't try to match Grant's performance. He just told the story. He spoke of the sound from the container, of the heat, of the way Val's gums had looked when he carried her into the clinic. He didn't mention Afghanistan, didn't mention the nights he still woke up tangled in sheets, hearing phantom pounding on metal doors in his dreams. He just showed the photos Liza had taken. Val sprawled on the exam table, IV in her leg, thermometer display showing a temperature 2 degrees shy of lethal, close-ups of her bloody paws, the vet's notes. Then Dorothy Bell walked nervously to the stand, handbag clutched in both hands like a life preserver. "I didn't want to make trouble," she said, voice trembling. "But when I heard on the news that Mr. Kincaid said he'd only put the dog away for a minute or two, it didn't sit right." She explained how her doorbell camera worked, how it stamped time on the footage, how the timestamp on the clip of Grant walking toward the container with Val at his heels read 3:17 p.m. And the timestamp on Ethan's truck pulling away in a cloud of dust, Val barely alive in the back, read 3:39 p.m. 22 minutes. Grant's lawyer tried to argue about clock drift, camera malfunction, anything to shave those minutes down to something less damning. But numbers had a way of refusing to lie. Judge Cortez watched Valkyrie throughout the testimony. The dog never moved toward Grant. Not once. But when the bailiff dropped a stack of files and the sound crashed like a gunshot through the room, Val surged to her feet, planting her paws over Ethan's boot, body angled outward between him and the noise. Her hackles rose. She didn't bark, didn't lunge. She simply placed herself between danger and the man she had decided was hers. "Miss Harper," the judge said finally, turning to Liza, who'd been waiting in the witness box, expression tight. "In your professional opinion, would the dog have survived another 10 minutes in that container?" Liza's mouth pressed into a firm line. "No, Your Honor," she said. "She was already on the edge of heat stroke when Mr. Cole brought her in. Another 10 minutes, she would have gone into organ failure. Another 20, she'd be dead." The judge looked from the vet to Ethan to Grant. "Property," she repeated softly, almost to herself. "That's what the law calls her." She looked down at her notes, then back up. Her eyes were very sharp behind her glasses. "But the law also recognizes something beyond property in cases of cruelty and neglect. It recognizes custodial fitness." She leaned forward. "Mr. Kincaid," she said, "you locked a 10-year-old dog in a steel container in 98-degree weather for at least 20 minutes, unattended. That is not an accident. That is an act of breathtaking disregard for life." Grant opened his mouth, but she held up a hand. "Be very careful with your next words," she said coolly. "I have no patience for perjury." He shut his mouth, jaw working. "As for Mr. Cole," the judge continued, "he did, in fact, trespass on your land and damage your locks. Under different circumstances, I might be inclined to take a dim view of that. But sometimes, Mr. Kincaid, the law has to look at not just what was broken, but what was saved." She folded her hands. "Custody of Valkyrie is awarded to Ethan Cole," she said, "effective immediately. All claims to ownership from the Kincaid estate are terminated on the grounds of demonstrated neglect and cruelty." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Grant surged to his feet. "You can't—" "I can," Judge Cortez snapped, "and I just did. You may file an appeal if you like, though I strongly suggest you consult criminal counsel first, because I am referring this matter to the district attorney for further review under the Texas Animal Cruelty Statute." The sound of the gavel cracked through the courtroom like a rifle shot. Valkyrie flinched once, then relaxed when Ethan's hand settled on her shoulders. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled of exhaust and sea salt and something else. Change. Reporters clustered by the steps, microphones ready. Some pointed at Grant as he stormed past, face red, tie askew. Others turned toward Ethan, but he kept walking, eyes on the dog at his heel. "Come on, girl," he said softly. "Let's go home." Thus, months passed. Summer beat down on the Gulf, then softened into the gentler warmth of early fall. Tourists thinned out. The town took a breath. Ethan's uncle's recovery went from painful to tedious, which in Ethan's book was an upgrade. Construction jobs at the marina came and went. Some nights he lay awake listening to the distant horn of barges moving through the ship channel and thought about re-enlisting. Most nights he fell asleep with Valkyrie stretched along the length of his bed and Nova curled on the rug, the steady weight of their breathing anchoring him more firmly than any duty roster ever had. With Liza's help, he registered Valkyrie as a retired working dog under his name. They started slow walks along the beach at sunset, letting her joints loosen, letting her learn that not every loud sound meant danger. He learned things too. He learned that Martha had been quietly funding a local wildlife rescue out of her personal money, separate from the accounts Grant controlled, that she'd shown up with Val 3 years in a row when the shelter hosted a holiday photo fundraiser, that the shelter's director, a blunt woman named Naomi, had once overheard Martha say, "If anything ever happens to me, that dog is the only one I trust to keep my secrets safe." Secrets. The word sat wrong in Ethan's stomach. It would have been easy to write it off as grief-driven melodrama, except for one thing. On a rainy afternoon in early October, while Ethan was cleaning out the pockets of the old harness Martha had bought for Val, his fingers brushed over something that didn't belong. A small laminated card tucked behind a sewn-on patch, taped in place with medical tape. The front carried a photo of a younger Martha, hair longer, face freer, standing in front of a marshland, Valkyrie at her side, both of them wet and laughing. The back held a short sentence, printed in careful block letters. "If I cannot speak, look under the tall cross at the marsh," it read. Below that, smaller, "Val knows the way." The words made the tiny hairs on Ethan's arms stand up. The marsh. A month earlier, an environmental group had filed a complaint accusing Kincaid of illegally dumping waste in a protected wetland outside town. The county had shrugged, said they'd look into it. The next week, that same marsh had mysteriously caught fire. The blaze had burned low and dirty, stinking of chemicals, black smoke staining the sky. The fire department had blamed spontaneous combustion and dry brush. The activists had blamed Kincaid. Grant, in an interview on the local station, had simply smiled and said, "Accidents happen." Ethan stared at the card. Val, lying at his feet, lifted her head. "You know something?" he whispered. He slid 2 fingers under her collar, feeling the steady beat of her pulse. "Show me." It was stupid, he knew. Dogs didn't understand sentences like that. They understood tone and direction and the angle of a pointing arm. But when he stood, grabbed his keys, and clipped her leash to her harness, Valkyrie surged to her feet with a spark he hadn't seen in weeks. Nova trotted to the door automatically. Ethan hesitated, then clipped her harness on too. "Fine," he muttered. "Family field trip." The marsh lay west of town, where the land flattened out into a quilt of reeds and shallow pools, egrets stalking through the water on bright yellow legs. Or so it had looked before the fire. Now, blackened stalks stabbed up from ashy mud. The air still held the faint tang of burned plastic beneath the sour damp. No trespassing tape fluttered on bent stakes where the county had half-heartedly tried to keep people out. Ethan parked at the edge of the access road. The sky hung low and gray, pressing down. Somewhere far off, thunder muttered. He stepped out, boots sinking slightly into the damp ground. The dogs hopped down after him, sniffing the air, ears twitching. "Under the tall cross," he murmured. He scanned the horizon, charred stumps, ruined grass, a single power pole standing taller than the others, transformer gone, wood blackened in a pattern that looked almost like a crucifix. Val's head turned toward it the same moment his eyes landed there. Her body went taut, muscles tightening beneath his hand. "Track," Ethan said softly, the old command falling from his tongue before he thought it through. Val dropped her nose to the ground and moved. Not fast, not in the aimless zigzag of a dog following an interesting smell, but in a straight, purposeful line that cut across the ash and muck toward the leaning pole. Nova flanked her, occasionally glancing back at Ethan as if checking that he was still coming. At the base of the pole, the ground sloped down into a shallow ditch. The fire had scorched everything, leaving the soil crusted and cracked. Val stopped abruptly. She pawed once at the blackened dirt, then again, harder. Ethan knelt. With his bare hands, he scraped away layers of ash and mud until his fingers hit something solid. A length of PVC pipe, capped at one end, stained black but intact. A crude cross had been gouged into the cap. His heart hammered. He twisted the cap off. Inside, wrapped in plastic and still dry, lay a flash drive and a folded sheaf of papers bearing the letterhead of a private lab in Houston. Soil analysis reports, photographs, and at the back, a personal letter, handwritten in Martha's neat script. "If you're reading this," it began, "I didn't get to finish what I started." She laid out everything. The ghost trucks leaving the Kincaid lot at midnight, the barrels unloaded at the marsh, the strange rashes on local kids who played there. She'd taken samples, sent them for testing, using her maiden name. The results had come back ugly. Heavy metals, carcinogens, the kind of chemicals that didn't just happen in a natural marsh. She'd confronted Grant with the papers. He'd called her hysterical, told her she had always been too sentimental about mud and birds. She hadn't believed the heart attack theory the doctors had so kindly offered at the hospital. Not entirely. Not after Grant had brought her the wrong tea on the wrong night, from the wrong cabinet. And not after Valkyrie had growled at him as he set it down. "There's a copy of this drive in a safety deposit box in town," Martha had written. "But if anything happens to me before I get there, Val knows where this is. I trust whoever finds this to do what I couldn't. For the marsh, for the kids, for the dog who tried to warn me." Ethan sat back on his heels, the paper trembling in his hands. The wind picked up, bending the blackened reeds. Thunder rumbled closer. Val pressed her head against his shoulder, the weight of her solid, warm, alive. "You did good," he whispered. Nova shoved her muzzle in between them, jealous. He laughed once, a short, sharp sound. "Okay," he said. "We all did good. For now." He slid the drive into his pocket, folded the papers carefully, and headed back toward the truck. He didn't go to Reyes, not yet. He went to the one person who'd helped more dogs in this town than anyone else. Naomi at the wildlife rescue looked at the paperwork and swore softly under her breath. Then she picked up the phone and called a friend who worked for a state environmental task force that did not care who had donated what to whose campaign. Within a week, men in clean boots were taking core samples from the burned marsh. Within a month, the EPA had opened an investigation. And within 6 weeks, Grant's empire, built on charm, intimidation, and slag, started to crumble. There were headlines. Local businessman accused of illegal dumping. Widow's secret files implicate husband in toxic cover-up. There were subpoenas. There were photos of Grant being led into a federal building in Houston, flanked by his attorneys, jaw tight. On the day the indictment came down, multiple counts of environmental crime, fraud, and criminal negligence, Ethan took Valkyrie and Nova to the beach at dusk. The wind whipped the waves into white-tipped lines. The sky burned orange and pink and purple. Ethan threw a neon green ball. Nova bounded after it, legs a blur, joy incarnate. Valkyrie trotted behind at her own pace, more measured, but her tail up, her eyes bright. When she reached the surf line, she stopped, turned, and looked back at Ethan. There was no fear in her gaze now, only a steady, quiet knowledge. She had done her job, protected her person until the end, protected something bigger when that person was gone. Now, finally, someone had protected her. Ethan sat down on the damp sand, jeans soaking through, and let the waves lap at his boots. Val walked up and leaned her full weight against his side, head resting on his shoulder. Nova flopped across his legs, ball still in her mouth, tail sweeping sand. For the first time in years, Ethan's chest felt light. Not empty, not hollowed out by loss, but full of something that didn't scare him. "This could have gone another way," he said softly, burying his fingers in Val's thick fur. "If I'd driven a different road, if you'd given up in that box." She huffed once, as if offended at the idea. He smiled. "Right," he said. "You don't quit. Sorry I asked." Behind them, far inland, sirens wailed faintly. Not emergency this time, but the long, lonely sound of consequences finally arriving at a house that had pretended to be untouchable. In town, the marsh cleanup crews were already at work. Naomi talked about building a boardwalk and educational center there once the poisons were removed, a place where kids could learn about herons and crabs and the way ecosystems healed if people let them. She wanted to name it Martha's Marsh. She wanted to put a bronze statue of a brindled dog at the entrance, ears up, gaze forward, forever watching over the place she'd tried to save. Ethan had said he'd think about it. Val didn't need a statue. She had the real shoreline, the real wind, the real waves to patrol. She had a couch to hog and a veteran to drag into the future, one day at a time. But he liked the idea of other people remembering that, even when the powerful used their money and land like weapons, sometimes justice didn't come from a badge or a bench. Sometimes it came on 4 legs, with a nose for the truth and a heart that refused to stop guarding the people and places it loved. The sun slipped lower, staining the water copper. Ethan scratched the spot behind Val's ear that made her sigh and close her eyes. "We made it, girl," he whispered. Nova sneezed seawater onto his jeans and wagged harder. "We made it," he said again, louder this time, letting the wind carry the words out over the surf. "If this story touched your heart, if you felt anger at the cruelty that nearly killed Valkyrie, or hope when one man and 2 brave dogs stood up to money and lies, please hit that like button and share this video with your friends and family. It helps us bring more stories of courage, justice, and second chances to people who need them. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story. May God bless you and your loved ones. May He protect your homes, your families, and the innocent animals who depend on your kindness. May you always find the strength to stand up, like Ethan did, when you hear a cry from behind a locked door. If you believe in the power of loyalty, love, and justice that never gives up, please type amen in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.